Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies again with another video. This is going to be real quick because I got a question about the monitoring rule in a FTD. What is the point of that? All right. Well, a lot of people don't even really use the monitoring rule, and then when I see them use the monitoring rule, they kind of put it in the wrong spot. So, what the monitoring rule is on an FTD is basically a rule to see what traffic went through the firewall. Doesn't actually do any enforcement. You can't block anything. It's literally when you select the monitor function, it automatically enables logging. So as soon as you say monitor, it enables logging. And the whole point of that is to see what traffic has gone through the firewall. Now, why do people use that rule? Well, they use that rule to see what has gone through the firewall so they can create a policy for it. Because one of the things that you are going to struggle with as a firewall administrator is creating rules based on the actual traffic that is going through the firewall. This is where, when I do a lot of assessments, the first thing I see is a lot of any rules all over the place. All I see is source zone, destination zone, source network, destination network, and then any. So that is lazy firewall engineering. And why do I say that's lazy firewall engineering? It's very simple. It's because you kind of don't know what's going through that firewall, and you're just like, hey, just allow everything. Now, there's turnover. There's people that have done firewalls different ways, and it kind of forces them to do that type of stuff. Which, okay, if you inherit a firewall like that, I can't blame you for that. I could just tell you that, hey, on an audit, you get popped or something, you have an incident, a security incident or something like that that went through the firewall. First thing the auditor is going to do is say, hey, this rule is the reason why, you had an incident. And you kind of don't have any defense to that because you left the network wide open. I mean, I've seen this any stuff with no inspection, no malware inspection, no IPS, no anything, just allowing it. And at that point, it's like, why did you even buy a next generation firewall if you're not even going to use the next generation functionalities? Right? You're not going to use IPS. You're not going to use malware. And even if you're doing malware and IPS, you're probably configuring it wrong. Case in point, seen a lot of customers, they configure IPS, but they don't configure the variable set. So anything is there's this thing called a home net in variable sets. And if you don't at least at a bare minimum configure what the home net is or what the firewall will see as internal to itself, it will see everything as internal to itself, including public IP addresses. And we all know public IP addresses should not be considered internal to you, right? And then on the malware, I've seen in a couple audits where the malware policy was basically put for malware cloud lookup. Now, I'm strictly talking about Cisco FTDs now. Palo Altos, I've seen some weird configurations there as well, but I'm strictly talking about FTDs. So they'll do something saying, "Oh, we just want to do a malware cloud lookup. Tell us if this is malware or not." And you should see the surprise on their face when I say, "Hey, you know that action that you picked, malware cloud lookup? That's only going to tell you if it's malware or not. It is not actually going to do anything. So what is that going to do for you?" Oh, well, it's going to tell us it's malware. I was like, yeah, that's what it's going to do, but it's not going to actually block it. So the malware is still going to get onto your network, right? And now you don't, and it like, what's the point? And then put on top of that you're not even doing SSL decryption, so you can't even see what's behind that SSL tunnel, and the malware could be hiding here. And I always say, and I actually got some shirts coming on the way that says, "You cannot protect what you cannot inspect." That's it. That's as simple. If you can't see it, you can't protect against it. And I'll go through a whole, you know, network security framework kind of video later on. I mean, if you guys really want to see that, how I see network security, put it in the comments below and I'll create a video for that. Um, but back to what we were saying with the monitoring rule is placement. Monitoring rule placement. I already told you what it's used for, what you would need it for, and where you should place it. All right, now I'm going to talk about where you can place it. Now, most of the time I see people put the monitoring rule at the top of the policy set. Problem with that is when you are trying to do troubleshooting, let's say you're trying to do something like a firewall engine debug. And if you don't know what that is on an FTD, it allows you to actually see like when the it'll pull up a little monitoring console when you put it in the CLI. And then when it sees the traffic, it'll actually tell you like what rule it actually hit, like the exact rule it hit compared to like packet captures. Well, packet captures can tell you that as well, but this is like live real time in the firewall debug engine. And then packet captures don't tell you any of that. Or it can if you do the trace in the packet capture, then you can kind of see it there as well. But when you're doing troubleshooting and you're trying to see, okay, what rules is actually hitting, I've seen where it shows you the monitoring rule got hit first. And they're like, okay, well, we don't really know, like that's not the end rule, but you see in the firewall debug engine and all that stuff, it hit the monitoring rule first. So it makes your troubleshooting a little difficult, right? And then you got to go through packet tracers and all that stuff, and it still can hit the monitoring rule, and then you don't really know what rule is actually hitting. So where do I tell people to really put the monitoring rule? I tell them to put it right before the default block, right? So, and I'll show you that probably in my lab briefly. Like, hey, if the reason why I say put it down at the bottom right before the default block rule is I look at it like this. If the traffic went through all your policies, including your default internet policy, and it didn't hit anything, well, it should hit the default monitor rule and then get blocked, right? So you can at least see from the monitoring rule perspective, hey, when you go to unified events and you look up the action monitor, it will show you all the traffic that did not hit any of your more specific rules at the top. So now you can look at that and say, okay, do I need to create a rule for that? Or should I just let it be blocked? Now that I know that it's always going to go to the default block rule, should I continue to let it just be blocked, or should I actually create a more specific rule above my monitoring rule for that type of traffic because I care about that type of traffic? Now, there is a warning to this for those of you who have an undersized FMC. You will get a lot of logs. And if your login can fill up and potentially cause an issue on the FMC. So you have to be careful with this monitoring rule, right? Because if you're not careful and you just log everything to the FMC, which is why I say you should always log into an internal server like Splunk, stuff like that, SIM, where you're going to send it to the FMC and you're going to send it to your SIM. Because if you do that, now you got two places to look. Like somebody could be looking at the FMC and then you can correlate what is seen on the FMC in Splunk or XDR or wherever you got, right? So just know if you do this monitoring rule, you will end up having a lot of logs that you could potentially go through, but it also can potentially become a problem if you have an undersized FMC. All right. So I'm probably going to show you in later video where my monitoring rule is actually set up. I'll just give you a preview right now. It's underneath my default internet rule because here's the deal. If it doesn't hit my default internet rule, at least I can see what kind of traffic it was hitting and then, go down to the block. And I actually, funny story is I actually used the monitoring rule to tell me because I have Umbrella set up in my lab as well, and I'm going to do an Umbrella lab to kind of show you how Umbrella SIG works. I do have the secure access stuff, but for the people that are not ready to go to Cisco secure access and they want to actually utilize Umbrella efficiently and effectively, and probably do a modernized SD-WAN using Umbrella, even though I say use Cisco Secure Access, by the way. I have a lab on that, but I actually used the monitoring rule to tell me because my VAs weren't connecting. And I was like, why is it not connecting? And then when I looked at the monitoring rule, I started seeing traffic from the VAs. I'm like, okay, I don't have that in my default internet rule. So I need to actually put that in my default internet rule. And then once I did that, everything started working. So again, this monitoring rule will help you. You can also look at the blocks as well, but I said, let me look at monitoring to make sure actually at least the monitoring rule is working. And that's how I was able to create more specific rules for my VAs to work. So now my VAs are working fine and I have Umbrella up and running perfectly fine. So that was the monitoring rule in a nutshell. It is used to monitor what traffic is going through the firewall without actually enforcing anything to it. And it allows you to see what's going through your firewall and then create a more specific rule for it, so you can actually, you know, allow legitimate traffic that potentially wasn't working before you had the monitoring rule and you didn't know. You can also use block for this, but I always put monitoring right before the block. That's the placement strategy that I recommend. Now, you might somebody might tell you to put it at the beginning, but I usually tell people to put it at the end. Hopefully this video was informative. If you have any other questions about FTDs, or, you know, things about the FTDs, best practices or stuff like that, or like ICE networking in general, put it in the comment. And I do read the comments, so I may either answer you or I might tell you, hey, I got a video coming up about this. Stay tuned. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. This is Don from Padlock Technologies. Thank you and have a nice day.